a draw in the scorecards. 1 out of the 3 judges would score it the same as Harold, 114-114, and the other having it 116-112, and Maidanji, with his skills and natural size, at that time was practically unheard of. Takahara will only finish middle school and skip high school to 4 defenses. One of those defenses was against a now familiar face in boxing. The father of the not trying to unify titles, they should be fighting their mandatory opponents. So instead of shaming responsible champions doing their job as champion, you should be taking that energy and going after fighters that avoid their duties and find everything to not fight their mandatory, all while pretending to have such interest in unifying.
Aren't you embarrassed by this? A great fighter having to fight
a mandatory that's by the rules. I have to fight because they would do like Roy Jones didn't want them to do before he fought John Ruiz.
Don't tell me about John. Anybody else.
If I didn't fight and defend my mandatory with the WBC, they would have stripped me. And I don't care what you say or anybody else say. This is my life. It's my prerogative. You do your job, I do mine.
Active full-time boxers fight much more annually than an average fighter. They do this because either they do not have the financial luxury of having training camps, and this is a way of staying in shape, gaining experience, staying sharp while earning an extra dollar. Perfect example, former champion Sirsakitsour Rungvisai. Rungvisai became mandatory for the WBC Super Flyweight title, earning his rematch against Carlos Cuadras in 2014. Somehow Rungvisai did not get his fight for the title till 2017. Instead of just waiting around, gathering rust, and not making money, because he doesn't have such luxuries like fighters out west, he fought regularly till ultimately the WBC threw that burden on Roman Gonzalez. Now you're probably asking, does a guy like Julio Cesar Chavez belong in this bracket? And he actually does not. He fought all his mandatory contenders annually and stayed busy throughout the year, fighting opponents that you can classify as a sparring partner, but getting paid to do so like a Buck Smith. This certainly kept Chavez in shape and sharp, as he had a small window of time to take a legitimate break where one could put on some weight and party. Which, if we go back to Chavez's crazy lifestyle during those periods where he wasn't fighting for a couple months, that certainly helped prolong his career, as it forces him to be in fighting shape for almost a whole year, compared to your traditional seasonal 2 fights a year boxer, who few do breaks in moderation and stay in shape during those breaks of no fights. There is absolutely no one available on that schedule to be matched up against you. The date is already made for the fight, but the laundry list of opponents may not be available. In an ideal case, you will have that champ fight someone who is ranked in the top 10 of Ring Magazine, or 15 by that belt organization. If there are neither, that's a cherry pick. Example, Ledwaba's mandatory had backed out. Despite Manny Pacquiao being ranked in the top 10, on paper he is not next in line. Unless you have vital context, all of those opponents ranked above Pacquiao were not in no shape or form available to fight Ledwaba at that already scheduled date, so the IBF had to recognize it and grant Manny as a new challenger for Ledwaba's title. Lastly, purposely stalling a fight to where that fighter has a lower chance of defeating you. The average person wouldn't be able to see. A perfect, well-documented example is Sugar Ray Leonard against Marvin Hagler. Most ignored it because Leonard's eye injury and his long layoff, but Leonard had been putting off this fight for years, as it was literally brought up as early as the Larry Bonds fight in 1981, 6 months before the Hearns fight, as an option of the Hearns fight if it didn't happen, but also a future fight for Leonard if he were to get past Hearns.
For Leonard, this is the first part of a 3-fight strategy. The next fight scheduled for June is supposed to be against Ayub Kalouli, the junior middleweight champion. And after that, later in the year, a big one against a dangerous opponent. Either Hearns, the WBA champion, Cuevas, the former WBA champion, or our color man tonight, Marvin Hagler.
Leonard invited Muhammad Ali, Howard Cosell, and 10,000 other friends and fans to a gala ceremony in Baltimore's Civic Center. For Hagler's camp, the personal request of their presence could only mean one thing.
Leonard would then troll fans, media, and Hagler himself that he was going to fight him, attracting a massive crowd to a venue just to announce that he was retiring, which absolutely devastated Hagler.
And we sat there with that anticipation as Leonard led us down the primrose path.
To Marvin Hagler,
A fight with this great man, this great champion, could be one of the greatest fights in the history of boxing. But unfortunately, it'll never happen.
Marvin never, ever forgave him for that. To this day, you say Ray Leonard and you duck if you're with Marvin Hagler.
It wasn't up till close to 4 years later, after his second retirement, he decided to fight Hagler, all because he saw a piece of him slow down in the Mugabe fight. It's something only Leonard saw and no one else, to where Leonard himself even acknowledged.
And when the ref said 10, Ray stood up, he looked at me and said, I can beat him, I'm going to fight him.
People ask me, "So you coming back?" I said, "No, I'm not coming back. But if Marvin Hagler called me, I'd consider something like that."
Wait about it.
I'm not saying, no, JB, listen, we're talking here. I'm not saying I'm coming back. I said, if he should call me, it's something I could really consider.
I was home watching TV. They said Sugar Ray Leonard will be fighting Marvin Hagler. I said, what?
But the fight was so big and ended up being so good that no one cared it was an actual cherry. With all that being said, let's start the video. So this was a fight after Guerrero's loss against Danny Garcia. His opponent will be David Emmanuel Peralta. Robert just came off fighting for a title. The matchmakers really went deep and far finding an opponent, because Peralta is virtually unknown. All his fights were in Argentina. He did fight for the IBF Latino title and lost fights prior, but he was unranked. Peralta is not even in the top 40 ranks by the WBC. Neither has any rank with the IBF. Guerrero was ranked number 13 by the WBC. Given the fact that this was a main event, this was certainly a fight to put Guerrero in a position for something bigger against a guy on paper who was supposed to have given him a highlight reel victory. Now, there are many cases over the decades, and if not a century of boxing, on and off record, where fighters would joke on other fighters' opponents saying they fought cab drivers, which somehow that's supposed to equate to an inferior fighter because they have to work a job to contribute to their other job. David Peralta is an actual cab driver in Argentina who boxes whenever he can. Peralta, in his biggest fight, would rise to the occasion and put that century-old stereotype to rest, giving Guerrero all he can handle, even dropping him in the 9th round, which wasn't counted as a knockdown. Peralta would win by split decision. USA Today is real petty with this headline. They're right, but wrong, but right at the same time. Fonfara was making the defense of his international WBC title against unknown Joe Smith Jr. Not much information on Joe Smith besides the notes from local news that he was rising through the ranks. Based on the opponents he was fighting at the time, headlining small club events, he may have been in the top 50 ranks of the WBC, because unfortunately, due to the inconsistent available records of the WBC ranks month to month, year to year, I can't give a 100% accurate rank, especially in this case. Fonfara Smith was a setup fight for a rematch against Adonis Stevenson, who is actually yet to fight his mandatory or unified titles. This setup fight is in summer of 2016, and his last mandatory defense was in 2013. So this was a rematch that no one wanted to see. Stevenson had already convincingly beaten Fonfara. Morales was keeping it even in the first half. The final half is up for grabs, as both guys are landing at a great rate. The final straight at the end may have won it for Maidana in the 12th. Due to Morales losing the 11th and the 12th, Harold scored the fight a draw in the scorecards. 1 out of the 3 judges would score it the same as Harold, 114-114, and the other having it 116-112 in Maidana's favor, ruling it a majority decision. Just think, if Morales wasn't blinded in the first round to where he had to use instincts figuring out where Maidana's at, that and having maybe one more fight leading up to this, he may have very well beaten Maidana. So obviously, because of this show, Maidana did not fight Khan, and Khan went to unify against Zab Judah.
Al inicio de la pelea tenía mis dudas. ¿Será este el momento donde el boxeador se tiene que retirar y no lo entiende, no lo alcanza a ver? Nah.
As discussed in my video of real-life Hajime no Ippo moments, Takahara is a real-life Takamura. Jorge Castro was considered to be the best middleweight in the division after big wins against champion Reggie Johnson for the WBA title, the undefeated John David Jackson, and another big win in his rematch against Reggie Johnson. This put Castro number 2 in the world ranks under the G-Man Gerald McClellan. Given this is an archive ring issue of 1995, and this fight took place later in the year of 95, when it was indefinitely ruled that Gerald McClellan will not be returning to boxing due to his incident with Nigel Benn, that will make Castro as a number 1 ranked middleweight in the division by Ring Magazine. Japan is not known for fighters above the lightweight divisions, so Shinji, with his skills and natural size, at that time was practically unheard of. Takahara will only finish middle school and skip high school to further his boxing training. He started his pro career at 17 years old. Unfortunately, the Pacific region in that weight class at that time was incredibly weak. The opponents he was facing were unknown and pushovers, thus putting Takahara under the radar. Takahara would quickly pick up the Japanese regional title, important title you need to even get into the world ranks if you're not from America. He would make 4 defenses. One of those defenses was against a now familiar face in boxing, the father of the 2-time and unified champion Kenshiro Taraji. So much for a non-boxer. I feel like if fans looked more into the history of these guys who came from the other arts of combat, this gatekeeping mentality will come to an end. Heavyweight legend George Foreman once said, "There's no book in the world of making it in boxing because any path can become a successful path." This was in reference to the new undefeated contender who later became a unified champion, Nate Campbell, who picked up boxing at the late age of 25, went pro at 27, and found himself in the mix for a title shot just barely 2 years as a pro. Now, going by how offbeat Tyson was on the pads during fight week, let that set the tone how ill-prepared he was coming in. To also note that Tyson looked past Francis's size and strength. Outside of the Klitschko fight, Tyson always had the size, strength, and weight advantage on his opponents, which seemed to be an Emmanuel Stewart Kronk Gem signature with his heavyweights, as Lennox Lewis and Vladimir Klitschko uses these tactics. Peck away at the outside, occasional straight, then hold, pushing all that weight on their guy, rinse, wash, and repeat to where their guy is so tired and battered that they can catch them with something they can't see or just simply get the stoppage. Fury could not use these tactics, and he would have to think twice before even trying to hold because Francis has the advantage. So we would see Fury fight more on the outside like in the Klitschko fight, and when he was testing waters and boundaries in the first Wilder fight. The lack of Fury not being able to fight at his pace, we were treated to some interesting moments early on, which led to a beautiful counter left hook by Nagano to floor Fury to the canvas. Tyson will have his moments which were supposed to have been part of the script, but Nagano is outshining Fury by a wide margin. Right when it looked like Fury was just getting ahead in the fight, Francis would come back big, as seen in the 8th round. Absolute struggle by Fury to get anything on Francis, who is displaying quite a fine defense, something that is expected from someone who has practiced kickboxing. Francis, who expended a lot of energy throughout the whole fight, did not finish the fight strong. He finished as if he was up on the scorecards without the need of putting in a dagger, which in boxing that's frowned upon with the judges. Though there wasn't really a title for this fight, reasons why it was 10 rounds and not 12, you gotta take the title away from the champ. So there's many situations where this has happened and a close fight and the judges would side and give it to the champion or the A side. The career of Winky Wright is a perfect example. He did it not only in his fight with Fernando Vargas, but also against Jermaine Taylor, which cost him dearly.
I was like, what is he doing? I mean, he winning on the flurries. Go ahead and fight me. If I was him, I just would have kept fighting. That's the difference between us.
You think, since this fight was a draw, that he blew the fight in the 12th round?
If he wanted the title so bad, he should have fought all 12 rounds, because that's what I would have did. That's what I did. I fought all 12 rounds. I didn't get in there running them last rounds thinking I had to fight one. You know, I feel like it's a boxing match. You got to fight all 12 rounds.
Fury would win by a debatable split decision. Reasons why I say debatable is because I read mixed opinions on the scoring. It's pretty divided. It's either people thought Fury won just barely, the fight was a draw, or Francis won. But like the Morales-Maidana fight, Francis may have lost the fight officially, but he won the event. With the elephant in the room here, if we as boxing fans are going to have the energy with Deontay Wilder's reign as a WBC champion, where we saw much of nothing and no unification for the undisputed title, we need to have the same energy for Tyson Fury. It's going on exactly 10 years since Vitaly Klitschko vacated the WBC title, retired from boxing, and his brother, who had all the belts, went on a journey to obtain his brother's title, where he was blocked from doing so.